La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah.
Further than just the obstacles, how does somebody that is meditating go deeper in their meditations? How do they become deeper and then be touching the heart and function a little bit more from that space?
Right. Good question. The ultimate answer is really, or the first and really only answer is that you have to experience it. The more you experience that, the inner dimension of meditation or the heart of meditation, the more you experience it, the more you can verify that this is where you want to be, or simply this is where is what you really are. The more you verify that by returning to that place in meditation practice, the more you bring it out with you. So that's really the simple answer. As you mentioned, we spoke last time about the challenges in concentrating, in harnessing attention, and I gave some examples like relaxing into an awareness of the breath to make ourselves more gathered, etc. So what you're asking now is the challenge of how do we arrive at the heart and open the heart and kind of work in our lives from our heart, interact with, in our lives, in our day-to-day functioning, in our day-to-day world, in our day-to-day relationships from this kind of place of the meditative heart or the contemplative heart. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's not the same for everyone, right? The answer that fits all for everyone is that the more you verify this by practicing, the more you sink into the heart. So the more that one actually meditates, the more of a chance that they have to actually discover their inner center, the center of their being. And the more they touch that, the more they taste it, the more they had it and then they lost it and then they come back to it, because all of that, remember, is the process of meditation. The more they do that, the more they learn to stay in it. So the ultimate answer, the first and the last answer, is that is experiential. You have to taste this by direct experience. This is what the Sufis call dhok, which in Arabic means tasting. These are matters that have to be tasted first and foremost. This is important to understand. In this context, when students or seekers, when students of meditation or spiritual seekers come and ask this, one really has to have a sense of their talents, their qualities, where they are. For example, if you are the intellectual type and you're having problems finding your heart, it usually means a lack of sensitivity to your emotional, aspect or the emotional element of your soul. You have a strong intellectual sense, but the emotional kind of element is missing. So meditation is helpful in cultivating attitudes that can open the heart, emotionally and spiritually, because there's an emotional heart and a spiritual heart, one superimposed upon the other. And so the challenge for such an individual, for such a seeker, is that they need to tap into their emotional intelligence, as we call it, not just their intellectual intelligence, but their emotional intelligence or their emotional consciousness. The more they do that by certain acts that may be prescribed or that may open up in their lives, the more they will see, or the more benefit they will have in their dhikr, in their meditation, in their spiritual practices. Right? So that would be a kind of remedy to bring into equilibrium an awakening of the heart for someone who is more or less stuck in their head. Right? If we want to speak of it like this. For the emotional type, what they're lacking is the exact opposite. Usually, that the intellectual element is lacking in one whose conscious center is dominated by their emotions. Now that's a beautiful thing, because their heart opens to service or something that made them feel good, or sincerity, or honesty, etc., or just being open. They may resonate with a particular soul. That that makes them more present, right? For the intellectual, what makes them more present is an amazing idea. For example, a very subtle, esoteric, idea or concept. But for the emotional type, it's raw emotions, right? For them to go even deeper, meaning beyond the emotional center or the emotional heart into the spiritual heart, they need the help of the intellect, right? As if we were to make some kind of diagram or an imaginary kind of diagram. They need to contact or awaken the intellectual center of their soul. So for them, refining their thinking, right? Having them focus on or practice or exercises of directed thinking, as we mentioned earlier, is a means of clarifying or making more transparent or awakening that subtle inner center of the spiritual heart that is right behind the emotional heart. If we look at these things, spiritually, anatomically. Once that begins happening, they will see that they'll be able to go much deeper in their meditation, in their spiritual practices. So not one size fits all, right? How do we enter the heart? It really has to do with, in other words, your starting point. Is your emphasis more, is that which motivates you intellectual, right? Is that which opens the wheels of your heart? It opens the wheels of your heart, as they say, intellectual. Is it reflecting on truth or multiple truths? Or is it a feeling that's evoked from a story or from an interaction which, opens one to a spiritual emotion or a spiritual attitude, right? Or is it simply activity or action, more worship or more service, you see? So that soul type is the soul type that is motivated by will, by action, right? So all of these, when worked on together, will awaken your element of contemplation, right? And this is how you will deepen in meditation. But so usually the blocks or challenges that people have, that seekers have, that souls have in going deeper in their meditation is that one of these elements is just simply out of balance or not even awakened, right? So either the intellectual element, the emotional element, or the volitive element, right? Like the element of the will. So the element of either the intelligence, the will, or the affect, right? As we sometimes say.
So when you're talking about this, can you give examples for each one of these types, for the intellectual, for the one that's an emotional, and so on, examples that they could explore and try that would help them to open the other areas and have more balance?
Sure. For the intellectual, I would ask them if they had this kind of problem, which they usually do. And I don't like terms like bypass, because one is not necessarily bypassing, one is, kind of usually unaware of these elements of one's soul, because they're so concentrated on another element that's helped them so much in their lives to become what they are in their lives and to just simply be motivated spiritually. For example, perhaps for the intellectual soul, I would ask them to spend some time contemplating the nature of relationships and simply being present in a loving way for those that God has placed in their life, family members, spouse, or children, or parents, or whatever it is, or simply neighbors or the community, right? To whatever one recognizes is a loving relationship, finding strategies of reflecting on how to be more present in those kind of situations. That then becomes an exercise, but also a practicality of life. The more one does that and is more present for that, as they're present for their reading, for example, like an intellectual will enjoy reading, for example. To cultivate enjoying in a similar way, having fun in a similar way, in this more emotional context, will awaken the energies of, you could say, that center, the emotional center. For the contemplative who is lazy, if I want to be very direct or sharp in terms, for the contemplative who does not find happiness in excessive or a lot or abundant forms of worship, right? And they begin to see, or they see that they're having an obstacle to their spirituality, their spiritual practice, or their spiritual life, that they're now becoming distracted, or they simply feel they're unable to go even deeper in their, in their dhikr, in their worship, in their meditation. Assigning or having the exercises of activities, whether they're physical activities, connecting with their body in some way, or activities where they're connecting with the community in some way, may awaken this, this energy of the soul, or this element, or this faculty, that then helps that soul come into alignment, so that when that opens, they will notice a barakah, spiritual blessing in their spiritual practices, where they then will go deeper, right? The emotional type, as mentioned, it'll be important for them to read and reflect and contemplate subtle thinking about spirituality, about these things, to enhance, to get to the heart of the emotion of love, that beyond emotion it is a presence, and it is the fundamental aspect of our being, right? Beyond the emotional energy of love, for example, beyond how that motivates us. There's something about love that's more subtle. What usually helps is subtle thinking about this, right? So that's what I would then recommend, more reading about spirituality, about spiritual practice, or even subtleties of faith, of one's faith, or the spiritual subtleties or spiritual realities of religious practices, their inner meanings, to read and reflect on that, and then to try to recognize how that occurs in your own spirituality, in your own experiences. Because, often the emotional type, are very, kind of mystical in their experiences. Not always so, but some may have more visions or are more visionary. It's important to combine this visionariness with doctrine or doctrinal understandings, to bring a balance and clarity to what's happening, so that one does not go into a pure kind of subjectivism of their mystical experiences, but rather has an objective landmark or frame of reference for what they're experiencing. When that's awakened in them, it helps them go even more deeper. For the volitive type, who loves activity or actions, it's important for them to bring more meaning into the actions, fulfillment, and that would be emotion, and to then exercises to bring this out, and then also maybe more contemplation, to go out in nature, because that's an activity, but then it's about the contemplativity of that activity rather than the activity, right? Because they're very used to being motivated by acts and activities. So these would be, you could say, strategies, or simply ways to bring a soul into alignment. Once we're more aligned in the intelligence, element of the soul, the will element of the soul, the emotional element of the soul, then this kind of one-pointedness and integration allows an awakening to a spiritual oneness, which is tasted or experienced as a deepening in spiritual practice, in meditation, in spiritual realization.
La ilaha illallah, 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 la ilaha illallah.